All right, everybody, let's get started. I see a few individual seats still, the rest can stand. Thank you all for coming. Hello and herzlich willkommen. My name is Sylvia Dieckmann. I'm talking about auto-generating screenshots today. Before I jump into it, I want to give you a little bit of a background about myself. I'm an app developer. If I have proper employment, it's usually as a tech manager, but I'm also doing a lot of freelancing work and very often pro bono work. I started out my career in the backend, high-performance server-side work, but have gradually moved more towards mobile apps and via Android for the last few years, settled on Flutter. I'm based in South Africa, near Cape Town. But South African winter is horrible, and you hear from my accent, I'm German originally, so I spend a considerable time in Germany. And when I'm in South Africa, I'm quite involved in the Google developer community. I'm the GDG lead of the local Cape Town chapter. I'm a Woman Tech Maker Ambassador, which is another program by Google that's meant to highlight women in the industry. And by the way, I'm also a Flutterista, which I didn't put on the slide, I forgot. But what's most important for this talk, I have recently become a Google developer expert for Flutter. So that's kind of where my passion is at the moment. If this sounds all over the place, it is. But there's one combining thread to this. I love tech. I love exploring tech. I play with apps, with technologies. And then try to turn it into some teachable moment like this talk here today. So let's talk a little bit about screenshots. And what I mean is the screenshots that you need when you upload your app to the App Store or Play Store. You need to have some form of kind of visual image that gives the users an idea of what you're doing. It's a great opportunity to showcase your app, to communicate to the user what your app is about. It can kind of entice the user to download your app, and it can really directly convert into higher downloads. But it can also be a problem because these screenshots are a nuisance to create. They need to be up to date. If they're not well made, they might actually backfire and cause people to not download your app because they aren't impressed. By the way, I'm going to talk about App Store occasionally in this talk, and I use that as a synonym for both the Google Play Store and the iOS App Store. So don't think I'm taking sides here. So what I'm going to do today in 6 steps, I will show you how to use tests to generate screenshots and then upload them. I'm referring back to the slide, so let's focus on the first step first. To get me started, I need an app. So here's my app. The world needs another time tracker app, so I wrote one. It's called Fish Tracker. It's actually in the App Store and the Play Store. I think it has 2 downloads, and one is my mom. But it's there. And it has some screenshots, 6 of them. I generated them by hand, uploaded to the store, all good. But now I decided, time tracking is already pain enough, at least your eyes shouldn't be strained. So I wrote a new version that uses dark mode. That's all great, but really the white screenshots do not represent my app anymore. It's not the same anymore. So at this point, what I would have to do is go to the app again, and generate 6 screenshots, again, kind of remembering what types of features I wanted to highlight, and do that for 3 different devices on the Google side, and at least 4, preferably 5 different devices on the iOS side. So that's kind of 8 devices that I need to fire up the emulator, navigate through the app, go here, go there, take a screenshot. That's not fun. So this is where my integration test comes in. And yeah, if you went to, actually, let me start. So most people write unit tests and are familiar with that concept. Not so many people write integration tests. So let me quickly recap what the idea is. An integration test aims to test the entire app. All the individual components should fit together. And it should be as real as possible. So rather than a unit test that isolates one piece at a time, the integration test does the whole thing. Oh dear, I forgot to start my timer, so I'm 5 minutes behind. Okay, fine. So to start on your integration test, all you have to do is include 2 different packages into your app dependencies, and then you write a test. At some point, you have to think about the back end, because as always, tests should be repeatable. So you can't have the live back end. Who knows what kind of data is in there? You have to have kind of a controlled environment. So you can either mock or you can use an emulator, and I'll talk about that in the next step a little more. In my case, I prefer the emulator. So here is adding my 2 packages to my dev dependencies, the integration test and the Flutter test. Fairly straightforward. And then I have to create 2 different directories, 2 different files. In the integration test directory, I can list my screenshots test, and I can also add other tests. So it doesn't have to be this one only. And in the test driver directory, I have a single driver, and that driver will be used to drive all the tests I'm creating. So in the screenshots test, if you went to Max Weber's talk yesterday, you saw exactly this code. He put up exactly the same slide. You do a little bit of setup, ensure initialized, and then you have groups of tests. And in each test, you start by running the test widget command, and then you get a parameter tester, and you can pump and settle this test, do some operation, click here. Basically, you decide what your app should do. And then at some point, you call expect to make sure that your test meets your expectation. That's a very typical integration test. But we want to use that test to do a little more. We want to take screenshots. So what we have to do is let me see if my pointer works here. We have to decide where to take the screenshot and then how to name it here. The name is a bit blunt, but that's basically, I'll come to that in step 6. That's how Fastlane names the images that get uploaded. So I'll just use that. And then the one more thing I have to do is in my setup, I have to do a little bit of magic to deal with the image conversion. And this is only necessary for the Android side. So just call that once and be good. So at this point, we have a test that does its functionality. But I still need to think about the backend. I mentioned already, you can use a mock, and that's a very typical strategy. In my case, I prefer an emulator. And I do that because I want to have my app as close as reality as possible. Pretty much everything I ever write uses Firebase. As the very minimum, it uses Firebase Auth and Firestore. And so in this case, I decided I use the Firebase emulator as a stand-in for my backend. If you attended the talk that was in this room before, you already know what to do. They did exactly the same exercise. This is what you do to start the Firebase emulator. It's a fantastic tool. It needs a little bit of configuration on the first time, but then from there on, it is super straightforward. And basically, you just start the emulator once at the beginning of your session and let it run, all good. The emulator gives you then a few web interfaces. So here in my case, I'm only using the authentication emulator and the Firestore emulator. And yeah, I can log into each product manually through this web interface and kind of interact with the data, or I can script against it like any app would do. For me personally, the sweet spot is typically I use the authentication emulator interface to generate a few user records, and then in my test just use that name and credential that I just created manually. On the Firestore side, I prefer to generate test data in my test in the setup method. And in fact, that's what I'm doing here. The actual code is a lot longer, so this is kind of a small abstract only. In my authentication part, I'm signing in with the email and password I had set up manually. And I have some seed data where I generate certain records that I will later test against. And these should be repeatable. And you can set them up either for each group or for each test and tear them down afterwards again. Right, now we are already at step 4, the test driver. Now, if you look at the documentation for an integration test, it used to talk about the test driver, and recently it does not anymore. It says you don't need a test driver anymore. In our case, we actually still need it because we need an extended version in order to generate these screenshots. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a file integration test driver. And all I need to do is override this one callback on screenshot. And that's the one function that shows how to manipulate the image that I'm getting and how to store it. And so, for example, here I have the path where I expect my screenshots to end up afterwards. And that's pretty much all you have to do. Now you can run this test. You're not using Flutter test, but Flutter drive. And you need to give it the driver directory and the target directory, screenshots test in my case, and you give it a device ID. I haven't really talked about the device ID yet, so that's why I have the next step from. And yeah, that's the emulators and simulators. It's getting a little bit complicated now. I'm using the word emulator a lot. So far, whenever I said emulator, I was talking about Firebase emulator, the part that emulates your backend. Now, I'm talking about the hardware emulator that emulates your phone for testing purposes. On the iOS, on the iOS side, they call that thing simulator, but in Android, it's called emulator. So just don't be surprised if I keep talking about emulators pointing to different things. All right. What we have here is most people, when they start playing with an emulator, use the Android Device Manager to set it up. That's all good, but you can also do it from the command line. Each emulator you set up, you can give it certain properties. You can define the screen size or the orientation or whatever you want. There are certain prepackaged configurations already. And you can create your own. You can probe what's there. You can launch one at a time from the command line. You can see what you have launched, what's currently running. All of that is available through command line, through a command line interface. For example, here I'm checking what kind of Flutter emulators I have defined, and I have 4 different ones that I use a lot, 2 different Nexus devices and 2 different Pixel devices that represent the different screen sizes. Once I launched one of them, I can use Flutter devices to see what I've launched, and I can see here I have one launched. It shows me the Flutter SDK or the Android SDK, and it shows the device ID, emulator 5554. Now this is kind of a tiny little inconvenience. Actually, it's a big inconvenience. The emulators have an emulator name, something like Pixel 2. Once they're started, they have a device ID, something like emulator 5554. It's the port number, and it starts with 5554 and then gets incremented. So the next one you launch will be 5556. There is no easy command that gives you a direct mapping. And because the ports get assigned in order, you kind of need to remember which emulator ID corresponds, which device ID corresponds to which emulator name. There are tricks to do this programmatically, but it feels super hacky, and I wasn't comfortable putting it on the slide. So I'll leave it to you. The best is to start only one at a time, then you know exactly which device ID you're dealing with. So in my case, I looked at the Play Store specs. It says you need screenshots for a phone and 2 different tablets. I figured, Pixel 6 is good just because I have one, and 2 different Nexus devices. That kind of corresponds to the correct screen size. And when I start them, I get device IDs, but these might vary for you. On the iOS side, same story. I can use Xcode to generate simulators, to interact with the simulators and generate new ones, but I can also do it from the command line. I can list what's there. I can start one at a time from the command line. In this case, this awkward dance between emulator name and device ID doesn't exist. Everything is referred to by a UUID. On the other hand, Pixel 2 is a lot easier to remember than the UUID, so I'm not sure which one is better. So here, for example, I have a small extract of the simulators that were defined on my machine, and I was interested in the iPad Pro 2nd generation, and I'm not going to read the UUID to you. Right, so these are the App Store specs. 5 different devices, 3 different iPhones, 2 iPads, and I kind of eyeballed that list and found a few real devices that, or simulated devices that correspond to those screen sizes and those parameters, and kind of looked up the UUIDs. And again, the UUIDs will differ for you. All right, now this is demo time, and I didn't trust myself to type and talk, so I've pre-recorded the demo, but this is a completely unedited, just 1-minute video of me doing the demo beforehand. The fonts are too small, don't worry about it, I'll talk you through it. I just want you to get an idea of the timing. So I'm going to start it here, and is it running? Yes. In the top window, I'm starting the Firebase emulator first. So this is what's emulating my backend. And then I'm going into the lower window, and I'm starting the hardware emulator. And I think I'm picking a Nexus 10. Yes. OK, both emulators are running. The hardware emulator, I'm just resizing it a little bit. And now I'm starting the test. Still typing. OK, started. A test is running. It's a bit of compilation. It doesn't really take too long. And then you start seeing in the emulator as my test starts. You see, I forgot to add the dark mode to the startup screen, but from there on, kind of, it goes through the paces. It goes through the login screen, it goes through the topology screen, all the different screens that I had in my test. And OK, this is the end of the test. All tests passed. That's a good thing. And just for kicks and giggles, I'm now opening the images that I generated just to make sure they actually are there. And lo and behold, they are there. They have the right format. Everything is good. And by the way, I could have done kind of, for example, change the orientation or anything. It's totally up to me how I want to define my tests. Right. That's the demo. And we are good on time, so I can go into the bonus. So far, what I showed you is how to generate the images. I haven't talked about uploading yet. And here I decided I use a little bit of kind of a hybrid approach. So first of all, what I always do is the first time I set up a store, I do it absolutely manually because I want to have control over it. I want to see what's in my store. So I set up the stores manually, and then from there on, I use Fastlane to interact with the store. So on the Android side, you can use Fastlane Supply. When you init it, it automatically downloads all the metadata. It puts the images, the screenshots into different directories, names them 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and you have them kind of in your local repo. And from there on, you can use my technique to generate new images, put them in the same directory, and use Fastlane Supply again to upload them. So it's a nice way, I think, to update, to interact with the system. On the iOS side, same thing. The command is not supply, but deliver. And there are subtle little differences, like when you init it, it doesn't automatically download the screenshots. You have to do that as one extra step. And then the layout of the data is a little bit different. Rather than having 5 different directories, it sorts it out a little bit different. But you figure it out pretty easy. It's very obvious once you look at the data. And then once you have changed the images that you have in your local repo, you can use Fastlane Deliver again to upload the whole thing. So we're at the end, and at my assessment, what has this all brought to me? So this was an experiment I did. I write a lot of small prototype apps and kind of put them in the Play Store and then watch them age. And this was kind of an experiment that I did for myself, and I liked it a lot. But initially, I had gone out thinking like I will do everything automatically and integrate the whole thing into my CI/CD pipeline and so on. In the end, I decided that's, for my taste, a little bit too much. I want to have some manual control in it. I find like the store representation is so important to me that I want to have my eyes on it. I'm uncomfortable automating everything. Plus, the whole emulator thing is a little bit awkward to automate. So the device emulator. So in that case, I would probably look at golden tests rather than integration tests. Totally same technique, but you cut out the running the hardware emulators. But for me, this was the sweet spot. For me, the biggest nuisance is navigating through my app 8 times consistently remembering when I take the screenshots, labeling the screenshots, and so on. The tests take all of that pain away. The rest, kind of eyeballing the new images, uploading them, or committing them to repo first, uploading them, is a piece of cake, and that's what my CI/CD framework can do for me. So this hybrid approach is basically, for me, my recommendation in the end. And that is it, and I'm ending on the dot. Perfect. This is my contact information.